not working, which is not that often, I can typically be found on the river in my kayak. However, problem with kayaking is that this is 65 pounds and 12 feet long, meaning that it is way too difficult for me to carry by myself. So I always have to have somebody else going to the river with me to help transporting the yak from the truck to the river and then back. So today, this video will be me making a kayak dolly so that I can transport it all on my own. The former owner of my kayak was a fisherman and had these Scotty mounts put on the kayak to hold fishing poles. I don't use them, but since they are already mounted to my boat, I took them off and used them to mock up new mounts for mounting some wheels to. The overall concept is to create a dolly system that stays permanently mounted to my boat, so that I don't have to mess with attaching and detaching something and then storing it in the kayak while I'm going down the river. Instead, this system allows me to position wheels down in order to use the dolly and then position them up whenever they're not needed. So let me get into the trials and errors on how I made this happen. I will be making my own new mounts from wood and went with the chunk of white oak I had left over from making an axe handle years ago. I made the footprint a little larger than the original mount and also made the top portion a little thicker and taller, as I plan to stick a pin through it as a way to keep the wheels in their up or down position. I used my bandsaw to quickly cut them out, then stuck a roundover bit in my router table to give them a nicer look, and also used my belt sander to smooth out all of the surfaces. Since I already have holes in my kayak from the previous mounts, I used them to mark the locations on the new mount so I wouldn't have to drill any more new holes in my boat. Of course, if you're starting from scratch, then you can just position the holes wherever you like. Once the holes were marked, I also punched these out using my drill press. I determined the size of the bit by the hardware that was used on the previous mounts. But if you are going to be starting from scratch, then first pick out your hardware and then pick the bit to match. You just want to create a through hole through the mounts. Then I flipped them over and used a slightly larger Forstner bit to open up the top of the holes. This will give the head of the screws room to be inserted into the mounts. And that is one completed mount. It only took about 15 minutes to get to this point. And of course I repeated everything in order to make a second one that matched. Next I moved on to making the legs. I used a conduit bender to get the legs at a 90-degree angle. This was a little challenging, but I eventually got two pieces where I needed them. At this point, I left the legs long so that I could mark exactly where I wanted them cut at. This entire process was just one big trial and error, so I just guessed at the length. I stuck them in my super jaws and used a hacksaw to cut them down. To mount the wheels, I started off by drilling a hole near the end. I used a 10-inch no-flat tire wheel that is pretty lightweight, a bolt with two washers on either side, then secured everything with a nut, tightening things down, but not so much that the wheel wouldn't turn freely. And this is starting to look like something. Now the goal is to be able to have the legs move freely, but then lock in either the up or down position using a large pin to hold it in whatever position is needed. I first settled on a pin that was long enough to make it all the way through the wooden mounting blocks, then used my drill to punch a through hole, trying to make it as straight as possible. With that hole punched, I placed the legs back into the mount and put in what will be the up or stowed away position. Then punched a corresponding hole through the conduit. Drilling these holes in place was a little difficult, so when it came time to drilling the down position holes, I marked my location but then stuck the leg in my super jaws to drill it out. And I found it easiest to drill a pilot hole using a smaller bit first, then enlarging it to the size I needed for the pin. I also wallered out the hole just slightly. It's really important that these holes not have a lot of slop or play in them, but enlarging the hole just a tad bit does make slipping in the pin a little bit easier. At this point, things looked like they should work, so I set the yak on the floor and gave it a test run.
Nope. It's not gonna work.
Oh no. I don't know if you can actually see clearly or not. The mounts are caving in the boat's body, and of course I simply cannot have that. So, original thought was to place a piece of conduit from this mount over here, permanently attach it to the inside, enlarge this hole, and then that way this piece of conduit can slip inside of the permanently attached conduit. However, before going that route, I'm gonna try just a piece of wood adhered to the top going from this mount to the other and see if that solves the problem. After cutting the piece to length, I cut in a subtle curve at the bandsaw just for looks. After rounding over the edges and giving it a good sanding, I attached it to the wooden mounts. Doing this over at my workbench so that I can clamp things together and leave it sitting overnight. The next morning, I removed the clamps and reattached the entire mount to my boat. Reattached the legs and then tried it again. And again, things did not work. The caving in problem went away, but I positioned the legs too much in a vertical position to where whenever I pulled the boat, the legs actually moved forward instead of back. To fix this problem, I re-drilled the down position hole so that the legs had a back tilt angle to them whenever they were in the down position. Let's see if this is gonna work. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay? Okay. Woo! And that works. So now I can position the legs down when I want to drag the boat, but then quickly unlock the pin, rotate the legs up, and then lock them in the stowed away position as I'm floating down the river. And it's stowed. So before calling this project a wrap, I put on 2 coats of a spar urethane to protect the soak from water and also UV rays. Although even though this mount will get wet occasionally, it'll stay dry the vast majority of its life. All in all, this was a really fun but challenging project. And what this allows me to do, having this kind of permanent onboard kayak dolly, is be able to go to the river or the lake by myself and maneuver around my boat. I still have plenty of room to throw my ice chest into the back, and then whenever it's in the back of the truck, I can put the legs into the down position, set the back end of the boat down first, maneuver out the front, and then just pull it into the water to where then I can stow away the legs. And then of course, whenever it's time to get out of the water, I'll be able to put the legs into the down position, roll it up to the back of the truck, lift in the nose of the boat, and then move it back in to where I'll then be able to put the legs in the stowed away position. So while this concept does work, there are a few improvements I want to make. One is to get a little bit larger wheel diameter. I tested it out on some uneven territory, and while the back of the boat doesn't drag, it is pretty darn close, so a little bit larger diameter. Another thing is I think I'm going to remake the legs and drill all of these holes at the drill press to make them more accurate. I think that'll smooth out the transition of being able to move this pin and up and down location, therefore making it quicker. Overall, I hope that you enjoyed coming along with me as I figured this project out, and of course I would love to hear your comments down in the section below. I will see you on whatever I'm building next.